Well, hello, and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IOs, HRs, recruiters, and an actor or two as we try to make the world of work just a little bit better. And Jeremy, there's finally an episode where both of us are here. Good to see. And we're going to continue something that you guys started last week. This week, we're going to talk about real habits, real principles, the collective toolkit of real world strategies to lead you to a better place. I was inundated with programs around January 1st, all going, what's your New Year's resolution? And I stopped making resolutions years ago because, yeah, that's, 3 days of my life. But I am, focused on self-improvement and especially with habits, getting on track to be more successful. And it sounds like this is the best day for me to be here.
So last week, and I was mentioning this before we hit record. Last week was episode 234. So if you're just catching this one, look back at episode 234 when you can, and maybe start with that one. We got into the research, of course, like we normally do, and we also got into the Ogmandino scrolls. So there's a book from Ogmandino called The Greatest Salesman in the World. And yes, it has salesmen in it, but it's really like it's life principles. And he's written many books. And it's an interesting book, just to give a recap, because basically it starts out with a story, with a really interesting story in which somebody gets access to these scrolls. And the person who gets access to these scrolls is to read the first scroll and then the second scroll. And each of these scrolls is a principle, except for the first one. The first one talks about the habit. And the second one starts with the principles. And you're supposed to read each scroll that's in the book for 30 days, 3 times a day, and then go on to the next one. So it's really about a 45-week journey. And when I mentioned that last week, LindaAnn's eyes perked up because it's a book that she had read a while back. And I've been sharing my journey that I started right around, I think, so it's been about a month now, December 7th, with doing this. And I was thinking about this before we came. So we're talking about habits, and we're talking about principles. And what one thing we can derive is that if we create habit behaviors based on the principles, then the principles themselves actually become a habit. And this thought popped into my head in terms of like, how am I feeling with my own journey of doing this? At first, it's almost like if you take a gallon water jug, like a gallon milk jug, just fill it with clear water, and then you drop little pieces of ice. Because at first we're really intentional, right? You have to think about these habits. You have to set a timer, or usually it's some kind of a situational cue. And you can kind of, you drop the ice in, you see it go in. It's very much there. You recognize it, you know it's there. You shake it around, you can feel the ice in there. But what I've noticed is it's almost like if you take some dark tea maybe, and you pour that, maybe the gallon jug is 3/4 of the way full, and you pour the tea in there. It enters into the gallon, and you see the little cloud of the color, and then all of a sudden it just starts to change color. It's this really subtle, comfortable, calm kind of a transition. And it's basically, instead of there's ice and then there's the water, it becomes tea in the water, so it's basically all one thing. And you just start to feel like you're living the habits, and they become, you don't have to think about them as much. And that's one of the things that we talked about last time, which makes sense because in some of the research, and I'll point to this real quick. um, when you look at preparation, action, the early stages, colorful, effortful. So in the beginning, I'm trying to look, 'cause I'm looking at this article. When we first start to create a habit, you have heightened awareness. You're very conscious in your planning because you have to avoid, like, for example, healthy or unhealthy foods. You have to think, how am I going to replace a habit with a new habit, or piggyback from a good habit to another good habit, however you're going to work it. And then, especially with physical activities, you have these new behaviors, again with these raised awareness, but then you have this thing of planning. So you have to plan, like if you're going to go running, you have to actually start to plan that throughout the day. But eventually what happens, it starts to be that dark tea that goes into the water and just starts to become that gallon, where you don't even think about it. It's just that part of the day hits, and then you go running. And it does get easier. It's hard. It's really hard. And again, this is why New Year's resolutions usually fail. One of the things in the research that we learned in the last episode was goals. So when you look at actual habits that are effective, goals really have nothing to do with that once you have the habit. Because if you go to the gym, if you create a goal to go to the gym and it becomes habit, whether or not you have a goal to be healthy or exercise or gain muscle, that goal might go away. It might be in the back of your head, but you're not actively thinking about it. And even if you ditch that goal, maybe you're like top fit of the world, you're still going to go to the gym because it's a habit. You're still going to do that. So I see a hand or two raised. So I'm going to throw it back to you, Tom, and then I'm going to throw in the chat some of these documents, some of these spreadsheets that we have as resources, and then the references, of course, for today.
Sounds good. And great topic. I'm probably gonna have 1,000 questions, but Emmy, I do see your hand up, so let's go to you.
Hello and Happy New Year again to anyone who I didn't say that to earlier. I love this topic so much because I'm a big proponent of taking science and data and then taking it all the way to the finish line with a practical strategy or an actual tangible action that you can take or behavior. And so from my perspective, I'll kind of shift it a little bit. You know, I've heard about some physical habits or maybe some other work-related habits, but I do want to kind of share some personal experience with this journey, if you will. Jeremy was talking about his journey with this starting in December, and I actually am looking forward to going back to the previous episode and listening into some of that pre-talk on this. But for me, honestly, last year was a big year, a critical year for habits and goals and making some shifts in my life. And for me, it's been primarily on a spiritual basis. And, we as people are more than a collection of our individual selves. Now, our industry has done this to separated us, right? We've got MDs and then an MD for every part of your body. You know, there's a fingernail doctor and, a left pinky doctor and all of these, separate, disparate roles and positions out there that have chopped us apart. Dentists, psychiatric spin, there's an MD role, and then there's the psychology and the counseling role and all of that. So we're kind of dissected, but in actuality, we're this complete human being, right? We're a more than just a collection of our parts. We're a whole person, we're a whole unit. And last year for me, one of the critical things that completely transformed both my education, my professional life, my personal life was really putting myself back together. And what does that mean, right? For me, I'll speak from the spiritual perspective in my lens, which is the Christian perspective, which, is about a third of the world as far as people that identify with being Christian. But this really can translate to other religions and to spirituality as well, which is just making that concerted effort to be whole. For me, it was prayer. I start my day in the morning that way. It's the first thing I do when I wake up. I had to create the habit of getting out of bed earlier. For those that don't know, I have 6 children, and while they're not always here in my house, they are sometimes all here in my house. And so I had to come up with a time that would allow me some peace, some quiet, and some self-reflection. And as a mom of 6 children, that is really lofty feat. And so 5:30 a.m. became the time. 4:30 to 5:30 is the only hour in my house where it's guaranteed quiet, and 5:30 to 6:30 is pretty solid, but sometimes, closer to that 6:30 mark, it's a little harder. And so to create a habit of getting up in the morning for a person who literally purchased an alarm in the past called the Sonic Boom, which was at the time the loudest alarm on the market to get you up. It's got a component you put in your pillowcase that shakes your pillow. And it's this loud alarm that my kids could hear upstairs and across the house. I was not a morning person. So when I tell you every part of me fought this habit of getting up early and starting my day this way and starting my day with a complete connection and a point that you are one whole being. You are spirit, mind, body. You're not, parts, Emmy. It was hard. And it had to be very intentional. And I had to commit to doing it when I didn't want to do it. And I feel like that's such a translatable thing for every single habit or goal that people can have, whether it's professional or personal. But right, we're more than a collection of our parts. So we are a professional and a person and a daughter or a wife or a husband or a sister or a brother or a mom or a dad. We're a million things, right? All at the same time. How did I do that, right? And I had to do it during the days that I didn't want to do it. And we're kind of almost trained. I don't know if it's a Western thing or if it's a worldly thing, but I know as a Western thing for sure, we're trained to kind of like the easy stuff, right? To maybe take the easy road or what's the path of least resistance, or that's kind of our training as individuals in the world. Being intentional about doing things when you don't want to do them. It sounds so simple, but it is so difficult. There were mornings where I would say, God, I don't really want to get up today at 5:30. And then I would like have to use the restroom really bad or something. So it was like I had to really, be intentional, respond to my body, respond to my mind, respond to this commitment that I made to myself. And I feel like that can translate to so many goals, to so many things that people want to change or do differently. And all of that to say that this kind of practical strategy for me actually started as meditation and then it moved to prayer. And all of it to say that the beginning of my day is given to this concept of I am one whole person and I'm going to take a moment to reflect on what yesterday gave me, what my goals and my commitments are for today. And I'm going to commit to doing whatever that is, no matter how hard it gets. And I may go later and cry in my closet, or I may go later and, scream into a pillow. But at the end of the day, being intentional about doing the things that I've committed to started first thing in the morning and doing things that I didn't want to do. And that trickled into my job, which is the next place I went, right? Then it trickled into my evening with my family as the new role of mom, and then trickled into kind of ending my day. So all that to say, doing things when they're really hard and treating myself as an entire human being that is more than just a collection of my parts. When I went into creating habits, deciding my goals, and then giving myself that intentional space every morning.
Thank you for that very much, Emmy. Nick, let's go to you.
It's, again, very timely. Everybody's trying to go new year, new me. And it's funny because, talking about the book that Jeremy's been reading, the building of a habit of just something simple. It's a small win. Read this 3 times a day, every day for 30 days. It's very prescriptive. It's very, front of mind. It will get that reinforcement and that repetition to get those ideas in your mind so that, the autopilot starts taking a hold of them and you drift that way, whether you mean to or not. To your point about, stop making resolutions because you kept getting disappointed. I think there is a habit in goal setting. And so often what is missed as people are trying to shift and reinforce these things is they forget to check on them. They don't say, 30, 90, 120 days. They just say, I'm going to do it. Okay, well, when are you going to have step 1, step 2, step 5? And so I know for me, building a habit of checking in on, what are my resolutions? I do, a journal entry every year, probably way too many things to try and change. I typically check in on it around my birthday, around summertime. And then as we get ready to go into the next year, I've seen that again and kind of see where you are, where you've been and how that looks. And so going back into it definitely helps. But that habit of goal setting with measurables is something that, kind of starts that feedback loop again. And, for me now it's part of the routine. So there's less of a choice to do it. It just is part of my annual life cycle. And we're always trying to figure out ways to, limit the decision fatigue, put the sneakers by the bed so that you're getting up and you're running right away. And all these little, trying to trick your own psychology, trying to get yourself out of bed, all of these little tricks, which, can feel hokey and cheesy, but really when you take that pressure off of having to make the decision, you can be, a little bit, halfway through on autopilot before you're like, oh, I'm on the treadmill, I'm running. Well, now I'm going to focus in and get started on the day.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. Lee, let's go to you.
Interesting thing about goals. So, after our conversation last week, I brought up the topic during our pop-up get together. And a lot of times I don't really direct the conversation, but I was just kind of interested, because resolutions, blah blah, and being right after the new year. So I brought it up about goals, about goal setting. Do you have goals for the new year? Whatever. And I just made it kind of broad, personal, professional, whatever else. And it's interesting the responses. I mean, there were a couple of people who were just like, absolutely not. I don't set goals, period. And, um, you know, and I don't think you were there, Amy, but if I told you who it was, you wouldn't be surprised. Um, so, and I was like, interesting. So, what's what's up with that? I mean, goals are generally considered a positive thing, right? You set a goal to move forward in life or whatever. And so why would you be completely against setting a goal? And then, and then of course, and it's funny, the mental judo that some people get into, the gymnastics that, so like, well, I don't deal with goals. I just, I work, I'm results oriented, I'm going to do things. And I'm like, well, wouldn't a result be a goal? No, it's not. And I'm like, okay, whatever helps you sleep at night, and so it's interesting the way people couch these things that, I don't set goals or whatever. I just, I got a thing and I'm just going to get the results out of that. And it's setting a goal is too limiting and I can't. And I'm like, are you so rigid that if you set a goal, you absolutely can't change course? Because that's how the Titanic hits an iceberg. I mean, that's we should goal setting. I think is very positive, but I think sticking to those goals, hell or high water, is not. You should re-examine. Short-term goals. I mean, yeah, you could probably stick to a short-term goal pretty religiously if it's for the week or maybe the month. But when you're setting 60, 90 goals, and beyond, you should probably evaluate those and see if life is still conducive to those goals, because things change. Things happen with your family. Maybe you change jobs. Maybe, well, I mean, look at what's going on in California. Maybe a wildfire came in and destroyed everything around you. That's probably going to affect some of your goals. And if you stubbornly hang on to goals that, quite frankly, just can't happen right now, I mean, you're going to have some cognitive dissonance. And so you really have to be flexible in these things, and you have to examine those. And sometimes you just, uh, you have to adjust. And just to touch on something, about Emmy's thing, I was told a long time ago that, when for those who pray, that God always answers prayer, but, and there's always an answer, and it's either yes, no, or not yet. And people don't like the second two, because yes, sometimes the answer is no, and people don't like to wait. And, and delayed gratification is a huge part of why people fail in their goal setting, because they make this grandiose goal and they don't set the sub goals. That's why milestones are so important in projects. You got to set something that's attainable. Don't say, I'm going to run a marathon, when you've never actually run around the block. When I run marathons, I don't run 26 miles. I run 1 mile 26 times. Because that's what when my brain processes. Because I mean, I've run some charity marathons where I raised money, and so my brain said I've got to run this marathon, because I've run marathons injured, because I raised money for that, and I felt those people supported me to run that marathon for that charity, so I felt like I needed to at least start that marathon. And so when my body's going, you really ought not do this, my brain is going, just a mile. And that's how I went through that. And sometimes you have to do the mental, calisthenics to get through those goals. And back to the old adage of, how do you eat an elephant? And that's what we forget in our goal setting.
I sometimes wonder, Lee, in theater, we don't talk about, goals for our role. We talk about objectives. So, as a character, I've got objectives for the scene, but I've got my super objective for the entire play. So maybe we should just change the language around goals and just, focus more on objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And as an actor, when they hand you a screenplay, your first objective is not to memorize the entire screenplay. It's to memorize the first scene, right? Because if I hand you a screenplay and say, Tom, I need you to memorize this by tomorrow, you're just going to feel like a failure. But if I say memorize the first 2 pages, then we can work with that, right? So it's all. So even on the flip side of that, when you're assigning goals, so if you're a manager or something, be cognizant of what's possible.
There you go. Thank you very much, Lee. Jeremy, back to you.
Tom, before I begin, your mic seems a little distant. Just an FYI. So one of the resources I put in the Ogmandino scrolls. It's almost like it's a Google sheet, and I also provided an Excel spreadsheet, but it lists the scroll and 2 or 3 of the principles, and then it lists the behavior of each of those that can be tracked. It's the part that can get confusing is the difference between a principle and a habit. So you have principles, you have enduring beliefs and values. Habits are routine behaviors that can change over time. Habits or principles or guide decision making and actions. Habits automate responses to situations, and there's several other in terms of how you become aware of them, how they're formed, and how they're stable. But without getting into that, looking at, for example, the Ogmandino scrolls, you have things. It's interesting because it's hard to see which is which. Like one is today I'll be the master of my emotions. So that could be a goal. That can also be a principle. But then it has each behavior, like respond, don't react, stay calm under stress, cultivate emotional balance. You have I will laugh at the world. That's listed as a principle, but that could also be a behavior. I will pray for guidance. I will act now. Today I will multiply my value 100-fold. So it kind of makes me think of that tea in the water example. It gets a little cloudy, but overall, we look at what are the exact, because we're looking at the toolkit, like what are actual habits and principles. So I found / created a list of other principles to live by. So I want to share some of those because the ones in the scrolls are certain principles. Maybe other people have different desires, different personalities, different goals, for example, and they want to look at different principles. But there's all kinds of principles. There's mindset principles, productivity principles, values-based, resilience, communication principles, learning and growth, financial, legacy. And I came up with 2 of my own that I didn't necessarily find in the scrolls, but one was actually born from them. But other principles that people can say, look, I want to live by these. Now, I'll make a side note. The beauty of, and it's interesting, it's like, how do we do this? The beauty of the book in these scrolls is that there's a principle and a habit, but it's not just a checklist. There's a narrative. So each scroll is about, in the book, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 pages long. So there's a story there. There's a narrative. The author attends to every doubt that one might have, or all the fruit that might be thrown at the comedian, everything that's in one's head of what will throw me off with trying to perform these behaviors, create this habit, live by this principle. It's almost like he's thought of everything. I think I mentioned this last week as well. But the beauty of that's that there is a narrative. So one thing that we can take just from experience here is that if you're looking to create a goal or habits, try to create some kind of a narrative. And we talk about AI here all the time. Have AI do it. So, hey, look, I'm trying to create this, live by this principle and create these habits. Can you create a narrative for me that I can read each day and read it 3 times a day to help me live by this principle? And then Lee had a gracious post on LinkedIn. Something I said last week was take your favorite book or take a book and just say, hey, AI guy, make a list of principles and habits that I can live by based on this particular book. And again, it goes to that learning, and it goes to the added contact points. But here's some other principles to live by that could be changed into behaviors to add to the toolkit. Embrace failure as feedback. They're opportunities for growth, not permanent setbacks. Eat the frog. That's Brian Tracy book. Tackle the hardest, most important task first thing in the day. One that I came up with. So in the scrolls, I think it's in the I will persist until I succeed, which I think is scroll marked 3. Even childish swipes at a mighty oak will eventually take it down. If you hit that thing a trillion times, even with childish, it's eventually going to come down, even with childish swipes. So something that's been so a principle maybe to live by is something in there is I won't look at each task as such a big deal. I will look at it as just one childish swipe towards my end goal. Because eventually, whatever you're trying to do, that oak tree is going to fall. And if you have really difficult tasks, I mean, it could be, I don't know, maybe you have to go get your driver's license or like your real ID, which is this real ID thing in the US. You got to be able to board planes, I think, in 6 months. Maybe you have to find all your documents. Well, each one, you got to find your birth certificate. You got to get your social security card. You got to, each one of those, each one is a little childish swipe. It's no big deal. Doing your taxes, right? each whatever form that you have to find, or each Excel spreadsheet, it's just a little you start to look at things as no big deal. And those are more principles, but they lead into the behaviors, but they can be really helpful in terms of keeping us calm and focused and steady. Another one that I came up with was give the benefit of the doubt until all facts are known. Especially if you have kids, you might see something and you might just assume that a child did X or didn't do X, but it's just a nice principle to live by. And it'd be neat to have a narrative. Maybe I'll try it. Maybe I'll say, hey, AI guy, create a narrative about, I want to live by this principle, give benefit of the doubt until all facts are known, create a narrative that I can read every day. I'll list a couple others for the toolkit. Listen, seek first to understand, listen very deeply before expressing your thoughts. Discipline over motivation. Motivation fades. Discipline keeps you going when it's tough. Delay gratification. Sacrifice short-term pleasures for long-term rewards. Let's face it, we can get anything delivered to our house within a day or two. We can have information unlimited at our we get it, right? So that could be a practice. And there's tons of others. And how do you find principles you might want to live by? It might require reading. It might require journaling. It might require reflection. It might require talking to other people. But again, just sharing some of the things in the toolkit and some of the insight behind them. And before I turn it back over, because I see some hands raised, Lee and Emmy had mentioned the same author. So Og Mondino, he writes a book called The Christ Commission. It's a very interesting book that takes you back in time 6 years after Jesus was crucified, where the author, current day author, a fictional current day author, is thrust back in time to 6 years after that and basically interviews everyone. And it's just a fascinating narrative. It puts you right in the space. It's interesting. It's a well-written book. So just to share that book. Tom, back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. And let me tell you, Jeremy is great with parenting advice as well. You're a great dad. I wish you were my dad. Thank you very much. LindaAnn, let's go to you.
So I think the challenge of doing some of these is really being overwhelmed with the task, right? Mm-hmm. We look at it as Jeremy said, oh, it's a 45-week process. And people go, oh man, I can't do it for 45 weeks. I can't, and never even start. Rather than, it's the one day at a time process, and understanding that it's always a choice for you. If you choose not to do it, you're not a failure. And that self-talk is just part of doing this helps you with some of the negative self-talk that we tend to beat ourselves up with. And really understanding the power of the present, right? Where you are right now, that you are a human, which means you are inherently flawed, and being okay with that and understanding that. So every time if you miss it at noon, you don't beat yourself up. You go, yep, and then get back on the horse or whatever and be okay with yourself because you're making the choice to go back to it. And it's really a kinder, gentler mindset for us, right? And I think Lee was talking about sometimes we're not very patient with the prayer and those kinds of things. Huh, I wouldn't understand that at all. Um, but being aware of kind of what universal timing is, if you're really conscious in the present and picking up what's being offered to you at the time, you understand that things happen in the right time. Right. And being and the practice of gratitude for all those little things, whether it's the guy who pulled out of the parking spot right in front of you and expressing gratitude in that, or just being able to, you have a beautiful sunshiny day and being joyful in that. Those types of mindsets and practices go so far in changing your life. And let's see. Yeah, I think that hits several of the points I was thinking of as people were speaking.
Well, some very good points. And you did talk a little bit about that mindset, and how do you, can you throw a few suggestions out of, some people or some positive mindsets that you would encourage people to take a look at?
I think that one thing that as I went through some of the healing that I've done and so forth, is recognizing your self-talk, right?
Mm.
Really, when you really being able to hear yourself and how you're speaking to yourself, and then just stopping it. You don't have to do anything special. Just stop it and then replace it with something kinder, right? And go ahead.
Well, I was going to also ask about, sort of being open to the universe, because, I try to do it myself because, I can set a goal, I can be going down that path, and all of a sudden the universe comes over here and goes, we know you're on that path, but here's a really interesting path to go down. But I've also seen, other people who, like, the universe is now shouting at you and you're not listening. So how do we stay open to the universe, or just to, being present and being aware of the opportunities that come to us?
I think, and for me, it was recognizing when it was talking to me and being grateful for that, right? And it's a lot of living in the present. It might have been right around the time I was doing the Agmandino's book, but I remember thinking about how people are very focused on either the past or the future.
Right.
And what just occurred to me at that time was, when you're really future focused and worrying and all about that, you're missing your present. You're missing everything that wonderful that can happen to you right now. And what that leaves you with is you don't have a past.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have, so living in the present is a real gift to yourself.
And most people aren't even aware of it. I mean, I remember first year theater students taking them through visualization exercises, and there is no past, there's no future. It's just this one moment right here, right now. And most of them couldn't grasp that. Is it that they're unwilling to let go of the past, or, as young people, they're just so focused on the future that the current moment just passes them by?
Yeah, and so even if you recognize that, that's progress, right?
Right.
And understand that it's always a choice, and you're being okay with the choices you're making.
Yeah, it all comes down to choices, doesn't it? Thank you very much for that. Emmy, let's go back to you.
Thanks for that. I just want to actually build really quickly on that last piece of your conversation there and then share a couple of other points. The concept of time orientation is fascinating to me. Whether your time orientation is more past focused or are you nostalgic, this is something I read about in Italy, that there's a lot of familial celebrations that will honor family traditions, and it'll be a big meal, and it's a lot of past orientation. Some people are hyper focused in the present, being in the moment and making sure that they're in real time, and then some people are very future oriented, and sometimes it's reflective of generation or maybe national culture or a lot of other potential lenses. But it's such a fascinating conversation to me, the time orientation and how people put that lens on and how it affects their day-to-day life just based on perspective alone, right? So that's super interesting. One of the things I really appreciated from what you were saying, Jeremy, was on the concept of principles and that they can have different roots to them. Values-based leadership is really the area I'm super, super passionate about, specifically human-centric leadership. And so I use values-based principles in a lot of different things when I think about it. And I actually just, because I like to do this kind of stuff on the side, as you were talking about the AI thing, I'm like, what would my principle of choice say? And so I went to ChatGPT and I put it in, and it said a narrative, right, that Jeremy was talking about as far as a reflection to give myself daily. And it says the power of humanity. And it's talking about, I'll just share one part of it. Today, I remind myself of the most profound truth. Humans are the most important thing in the world. Every person I encounter, whether at home, at work, or in the larger world, carries infinite worth, unique potential, and a story that deserves to be heard. And it just goes through some additional things. And the last sentence is, humans are at the heart of everything I do. And oh, my heart just got so big when I read this. So thank you, Jeremy, for that just real-time suggestion that I got to put in, because I love the narrative that was derived from that principle and the habit that I want to build of putting people first and humans first in my day-to-day work and life. And Lee reminded me of a quote from Eisenhower, or at least that he's credited with, that says, plans are everything, but planning is worthless. And as a project manager, I love and hate that quote, both at the same time, because it is something that I do, right? I plan for a living. I do a lot of planning, among other things. But I know at the end of the day, my plans are really going to get scrapped, that it's never going to go 100% according to plan, right? And how do I deviate? How do I have agility? Professionally, personally, has been a big challenge of my life. I'm not, as much as I teach change and I love to inspire change, I'm not very good with change. I think I've even said that. I mean, I'm just as hard-headed and resistant as the next person, right? And so just building that mindset of plans are everything, planning is worthless was super fun. And one last thing that Jeremy mentioned there was kind of taking those childlike swipes at things, right? I've mentioned this in the past, but I was a teen mother, and teen mothers graduate high school. Fewer than 50% of them will graduate high school ever. And then from there, it is an infinitesimally small number that become any sort of educated, bachelor's degree. I think it's like 2% by 30, and doctoral level is like 0.0002% or something just wildly small. And so I have gone through this journey since being a teen mom. For 20 years, I had this goal. And that sounds so crazy to people when you think about having a 20-year-long goal, right? Like something that's, you're like chipping away with these tiny little swipes for 20 years of your life. It sounds insane, but 2025, this year in May, God willing, I'm going to be walking across the Regent University stage as Dr. Emmy. And that was 20 years of childlike swipes that I can't wait to go back to my like Latinas in my Houston community that are still, in that teen mom state and say, hey, I know 20 years sounds outrageous, but I am evidence that it is real, that it is possible, and that 20 years of chopping down a tree gets that baby to the ground.
There you go. I think Jeremy's going to be my dad and Emmy's going to be my mom. There you go. Thank you very much, guys. Nick, let's go to you.
And you also want me to be your boss, so you just got everything covered today, Tom. Going back to what Emmy was talking about originally, you talk about bringing your whole self together. Good goals, you do have to make time, create space, put up boundaries for. So even if it's a personal goal, you're going to have to potentially set a professional boundary of, well, I have to take my kid to school. This is important to me. So I'm going to create space for that and that family time. So yes, boss, I have to come in, 5 minutes later or whatever that might be. But kind of those domino effects of those connections we don't always see between, okay, well, I'm doing this goal for better health. I'm walking the dog around the block every day. Well, okay, energy levels come up, and the ripple effects kind of come with that as well. And so there is that sort of integration as well. And to kind of the central point of if we look at principles instead of habits, it's finding that why. Why is the motivation? We want good health. Well, because we want longevity. We want longevity because we want to enjoy life. And you find those underlying connections to really kind of keep yourself going because, this quote always associated with Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So if you don't have that anchor point of principles, you're going to get beat up by the goal setting process and successes and failures. And it's going to just whip you around every which direction. And so I think that having reasons for it as well. I think another point that people get too tied up on, they have these big lofty goals and they don't have a deadline. It's not to say that you can't set that goal again, because the goalpost is always moving, because we're always moving forward in time. But if you have a point where you're checking in, or did I succeed by this, that, did I make progress? It doesn't have to be as binary as people make it from time to time. But I think if you just say, I have this nebulous goal, it's going to eat away at your mental energy if you don't have a concrete step or something underpinning it. Or that walk away moment. It's not working for me. I don't like salads. That's not how I eat healthy, sort of thing. And I'm making this up to make it easier. But you do have to walk away. It might not be a good goal. It might have been a good idea. Okay, I'm going to take my nutrition serious. Well, I'm going with the classical advice, but after I've studied something, this is going to work better for my lifestyle. So that openness to the universe and lane changes and things like that. Again, goals are great. They give us, steps to move forward with, but those principles are going to keep us kind of going towards true north or whatever direction we're heading in.
Let me ask you this, Nick, because, you mentioned sort of, students and stuff. And I'm back in my university days doing my master's. I don't know how many PhD students I met, and maybe this is just the arts, but it was like, oh, really? And how many years have you been doing your PhD? And it's like, 8. And then you ask them, when are you going to wrap this up? And they're like, I don't know. So sometimes people get stuck. And how do they move forward? How do those PhD students actually complete their work? Or is that one of those indications where maybe you're doing something you don't have a passion for anymore? And as much as it hurts, you've got to change direction.
I've had that experience. I was, all but finished with a Master's of Divinity degree, and life changed. And I looked and said, I may be qualified, I may be smart enough, but I am not mature and ready enough. And it was hard to walk away. And I do kick myself because I could have gotten some level of certificate or something like that. But yeah, the walking away is not easy because you've made this goal who you are. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be whatever that professional goal is, or even personal. But you've tied that to your identity. That you kind of get stuck, and it's hard to see. And it's one of those where everybody else in the room sees it, but until that person actually wants to change, it's going to be very, very hard. And everybody's going to be well-intentioned to give them advice. And, it could be that day they wake up and go, well, I've been doing this teaching gig while I've been trying to get my PhD. My passion's over here. And are those 3 letters that important to me any longer? And, that reevaluation, which is self-reflection, it's being self-critical without being self-deprecating and trying to be kind to yourself in the whole process. Again, we say, if you didn't meet a goal, you failed. Well, that's not always true. You made progress towards, you learned lessons from, you may not have gotten the original result you wanted, but look where you are, take stock, and connect to the principles or whatever it is that is bringing you enjoyment currently, or the reasons you went into that goal in the first place.
There you go. Thanks for that, Nick. Lita, let's go to you.
Oh man, so much stuff has just popped up, and I'm going to try to make this really quick because I know we're getting towards the end. Like as a parent, like I have one of my children has not completed his degree. He made the decision to step away, and I don't know if he'll ever go back. But it's hard as a parent to see that. But he made a very mature decision to say, I don't know what I want to do. I'm just throwing time and money at this. And that was a very mature decision to make because, he wasn't motivated. His grades slipped. The financial aid, went away. He's having to borrow money. He's just grinding debt. It was a very mature decision to make. And on that point, I'm very proud of him for making that decision. As a parent, I really would like to see him with that piece of paper. So it is a hard place to be as far as that. It is, and it was a hard decision for him to make. So you have to respect that, and every person has to make that decision themselves. So I had to step back and understand that he's an adult and had to make his own decision, and I had to let him make that decision. I couldn't tell him what to make. I couldn't say, here's what I think your goal should be, because he's an adult. He has to make that decision. And by the same token, like, I've toyed with getting a PhD for, 30 years. Part of me regrets not doing it when I was in school, but at the time I was kind of tired of school and I wanted to get a job and I didn't really want to get a job. I wanted to get out of school. So let's be, if we're going to be honest, but, and I've heard all the things, well, in 5 years, you're still going to be 5 years older, blah, blah, blah. I've heard all of that, but, and would I like to have it? Sure. Would the knowledge be good? Yeah. But the reality is it really going to really do much for me in my career? Doubtful. And the reality is at this point in my career and at my age, do I really want to put that work into it? And I've had come to the decision that I really don't. I mean, I don't want to give up the evenings and I don't want to do the dissertation. And so I probably won't do it. And I had to actually do the soul searching of, is the reality that I'm going to put that work in, is it real? Am I really going to do it? Or am I just going to throw money at something that I really don't actually, at the end of the day, want bad enough to do it? And I had to actually sit down because I've always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do that one day. It was just a goal that one day down the road, like Nick was talking about, having a, goal one day. That's not really a goal. If it's a goal, you gotta have a deadline, and then just a couple real quick points, and then I'll hand it off, so to like LindaAnn's point about the self-talk, you have to be very careful with the self-talk that you give yourself the grace, but don't let it slip into giving yourself an excuse, because it's very, very easy to slip into justification and excuses for why you didn't do something. It's okay to say, well, I didn't do it. Okay. And if the reason you didn't do it is that you don't want to, well, just admit that and move on. Because the reality is, if you want to, you'll find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse. And just, if you don't want to, just admit you don't want to and do something else. Like me with the PhD, instead of continuing to make excuses, I have to realize that I just don't want to do the work. And it's not going to do enough for me to really do that work. And just, and as far as the, past, future, present, just to give you a visual. I mean, look at it this way. You ever watch, the creature movies? What happens to the people that keep looking behind them? They trip over something and get eaten. That's reality. What happens if you keep looking at your feet? If you're just so engrossed with the present, you're going to hit your head on something. You're going to run into something. But by the same token, if you're so focused on the horizon, you're going to trip over something. You got to have some balance of learning from the past, but figuring out where you are right now and looking to the future so you know where you're going. You got to have that balance, because if you focus on one to the exclusion of the others, you're going to trip yourself up. And with that, I will hand it off.
Thank you very much, Lee. But I sit there and go, and how many people in the world really know where they're going? So maybe, Lee, you need to write a book. Thank you very much for that. Peter, good to see you again. Let's go to you.
Hey, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm going to go a slightly different direction here, but still in the context of what we've all been discussing. Thinking about myself and the whole concept of New Year's resolutions and goals for the new year and so forth. Let me take a step back and just say, and bear with me, astrophysics was actually my calling many, many years ago, but I suck at math. So it wasn't a likely, career path for me, but I still love the whole field. And there's a particular concept some of you may be familiar with known as the arrow of time and time's arrow. And it's basically a well-accepted concept in physics that we can only go forward. Time only moves in one direction. And life changes in ways we can and can't control. And that's sort of the movement towards entropy. In other words, a coffee cup falls off the table. It shatters into pieces. You can't go the other direction once it's shattered. So that's the concept of the arrow of time. And, thinking about that, quite honestly, this year, based on a few years of lots and lots of intentional and unintentional change in my own life, I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm embracing kind of what time's arrow says, and I'm striving to focus really on only what I think I can control and doing my damnedest to let go of the other stuff, the entropy of around my life, if you will. So I don't really have any specific or precise resolutions that, can be derailed so easily in real life, which is my personal experience. I'm kind of decided to take my own advice that I've been paid to give others for like 25 years. I have a big, hairy, audacious goal, a BHAG. I'm sure most of you know that concept. For myself, to be really mindful about moving beyond my fear, I guess, of rising to my true potential and not becoming an astrophysicist, but getting really into what author I mentioned in the chat earlier, Gay Hendricks, calls my genius zone, and really kind of shed the fear of doing things I know I can do and do well. And, what's out of my control is out of my control on that journey. So, back to what Jeremy was saying early, I have kind of a journey in front of me, but I don't have lots of precise steps mapped out. I just know the direction I want to keep going this year and beyond. Again, sort of along that arrow of time. So to the extent that's of use to anyone or sounds absurd, have at it.
No, it sounds good to me, Peter. All I need to know is what direction am I headed? The rest I can sort of figure out on the way. So thank you very much for that. LindaAnn, I think you're going to be, our last speaker today, and then I'll be back to you, Jeremy. So LindaAnn, go ahead.
So just to what Peter said about controlling behaviors and things, and I think that was even a philosophy of parenting, understanding that I really can't control anyone's behavior, but I can control my behavior when you do some certain things, right? So it's an important concept to understand what we do have control of and what we don't. And to your point, Tom, about, how do we acknowledge those universal messages, and one of the things that when my daughter was growing up, I taught her that, kind of God or whoever you believe is the other power, will give you signals, right? And they'll start out with just tapping you on the shoulder, and and you can listen at that point. Or when he starts shoving you a little bit, you can listen at that point. Eventually, he'll start smacking you around a little bit, because you're not hearing the first 2 or 3 messages. And at any given point, you can decide to make a different choice, right? It's and when she would ask me certain questions, I would say, well, do you want to learn the easy way or the hard way? Because you can do it either way, right? You can learn by someone else's mistakes, or you can learn by your own mistakes, kind of thing. And I think that Emmy and Jeremy both reiterated the value of that small step and being okay with just good progress. And I've kind of gotten to the point where I don't, as a recovering perfectionist, don't need to get to the perfect end all the time anymore. And if we make progress of any kind, it's good progress. And that's a very freeing difference in life. And it helps you and helps the people around you, that when you have that kind of acceptance and expectation. Yeah. And just like, for example, I really hate putting laundry away. Really hate putting laundry away. So I'll just take the stack and put it somewhere in my vision. And then as I walk by it, I take one piece at a time, go put it away, and then go on to whatever else I was doing. It's just breaking it down. My father used to call it just baby steps. Just peck away at baby steps.
There you go. And that works. Sometimes dads have the great advice. Thank you very much for that, LindaAnn. Speaking of a dad, Jeremy, let's go back to you.
Peter, take a look at the actually I'll just put it in the chat right now. It's we didn't get to this reference today yet, but it might mean something to you as far as your direction and how you mentioned about plan versus direction. But it's there's an interesting example of Duke basketball team. It's four keep it real insights about applying the principles of collective impact. It's a webpage. We'll get into it, but you might.
Great, thank you. I will definitely look at that.
Yeah, I thought about you when you were talking, and then what I like what Lee was saying too about where you look. You can't look behind you. It's like if you're like NASCAR, right? You don't look at the wall. You're gonna hit the wall. If you've ever ridden a motorcycle, right? You have to look at a certain spot. You look where you're going, but you can't look too far ahead. It's like if you go to the gym and you're doing lunges, you don't look at your feet because you'll stumble. You don't look at the far wall because you'll stumble. There's a certain place, like if you're doing lunges, it's probably about, I don't know, like 6 feet in front of you. You have to still look where you're going. But like Lee said, you have to adjust and look at the right place. I've shared this a couple times, but there is research. I saw a graph one. It was done by a bank. Actually, I've shared this a couple times. But people who spend more time thinking about the future and looking into their future are like millionaires times 100 than those that don't. There's just a great financial impact. And we've talked about the Kouzes and Posner book, The Leadership Challenge. There's something in there about most leaders spend 3% of the time thinking about the future, but effective leaders spend about 25% of the time thinking about their future. Same goes with people in life. On that note, we've got a course, full-blown, very awesome, insightful course to help IOs get jobs. It's an IO career course. It's probably going to be launched, guessing, sometime in February. We're having a lot of fun with that. So that's something to look forward to. And next week's topic is from stagnation to success, remove your good habit barriers. And don't forget Lee's IO pop-up networking event every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. You can get tickets on the website and also on Lee's LinkedIn page. I think I said all that right. Tom, did I forget anything?
I don't think so. I think you got it all.
All right. Hey, see you guys next week. Counting out in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.